lateral deviation indication on the PFD is in the correct sense and may be used. Do not use the lateral deviation indicators on the standby attitude indicator and the ND, as these operate in the reverse sense. In order to arm and capture both localizer and glide slope, approach mode must be selected via the MCP approach button. Pressing approach replaces a previous VOR LOC selection, and both localizer LOC 1 or 2 and glide slope GS 1 or 2 are armed, which is confirmed at the FMA, and an ON legend illuminates in the approach button. Caution: if approach is selected before the localizer is captured, the system is capable of capturing the glide slope before the localizer. This might lead to reduced terrain clearance under certain circumstances. ATC clears us for the ILS 23. The localizer is captured, confirmed at the FMA by LOC 1 in green with the number 1 system as master. Approach is pressed, and GS 1 in white indicates that the glide slope number 1 is armed. The glide slope will be captured automatically when criteria are met. It can be captured from any vertical mode. Once the glide slope is captured, and provided both VHF nav controllers have been tuned in the same ILS frequency with both course selectors set to the same front course, the FGS enters the dual ILS mode. The average of 2 glide slopes and localizer deviation signals is used and indicated by GS star and LOC star in green at the FMA. In dual ILS mode, both on lights in the Autopilot Nav 1 and 2 engage buttons, and both FD master lights illuminate. In approach mode, also in single ILS mode, altitude alerting is inhibited. After glide slope capture, the missed approach altitude is set in the altitude window, here 3,500 feet. Below 1,500 feet radio altitude, approach mode can only be left by turning off both flight directors and the autopilot. Or by initiation of an automatic go-around by pressing a toga button. Or by selection of VOR frequencies at both VHF nav controllers. The Avro RJ is equipped with a so-called fail-passive automatic landing system, ALS, which means that in the event of an autopilot failure, the aircraft has to be taken over manually by the pilot without being significantly out of trim. This is also true for aircraft with 2 FGCs. These aircraft have 2 autopilots, but they cannot be engaged together at a time. Before starting a Cat 3 approach, the applicable decision height has to be set at the EFIS dimming panel. It is displayed at the lower right corner of each PFD. For Cat 3A approaches, as in the following example, it is normally a standard value of 50 feet radio altitude. For Cat 2 and 3 approaches, both VHF nav controllers have to be tuned to the same ILS frequency, and both course selectors have to be set to the same front course. At 1,500 feet radio altitude, the FGS starts a self-test to assess Cat 3 auto-land capability. The test takes 10 seconds. If, after the test, the FGS detects Cat 3 status, the Cat 3 auto-land annunciator comes on and flare, FLR, is the armed vertical mode at the FMA. Only at Cat 3 status, the aircraft is able for an automatic landing. Some aircraft have a separate auto-land annunciator. This is electrically connected with the Cat 3 annunciator, so they are always lit together. Note that the FGS will always try to set itself up for Cat 3 status automatic landing. It knows nothing about the weather conditions or if low visibility procedures are in force. It would even perform an auto-land with the ILS being offset. Cat 3 status is just an FGS internal status. A flap setting of 24, 30, or 33 is required to achieve Cat 3 status, and an auto-land is possible at these flap settings. However, the aircraft is only certified for automatic landings at a flap setting of 33. Moreover, at Cat 3 status, parallel rudder engages to compensate for crosswind and/or engine out. At 600 feet radio altitude, the FGS starts to apply nose-up trim to pitch the aircraft up for a go-around in the event of an autopilot failure. Prior to 500 feet, the air brake is applied by the pilot. At 150 feet radio altitude, the system enters the align mode. The autopilot aligns the aircraft with the runway centerline by help of parallel rudder and aileron in crosswind conditions. Observe, LOC is replaced by ALN at the FMA. At 50 feet radio altitude, flare mode is automatically activated. FLR replaces GS at the FMA, and the flare annunciator illuminates at the glare shield. The flight director disappears and auto throttle changes from IAS to retard. When touchdown is sensed, vertical mode automatically changes from flare to nose lower, and lateral mode from align to roll. Ground and roll are displayed at the FMA. FGS applies rudder to maintain the aircraft on the centerline and aileron into the wind until 60 knots. At 60 knots, aileron is centered and the autopilot has to be disengaged manually by the pilot. Auto throttle is in the arm state after landing and has to be disconnected according to company procedure. For this topic, we go back a bit. The aircraft is established on the ILS with Cat 3 auto land status achieved. If the FGS now detects any conflict of the data which prevents the aircraft from making an auto land, the red Auto Land Fail annunciator above the glare shield illuminates. If both ADCs, or at least one IRS fail, the autopilot disconnects immediately. If both RAs or both ILS receivers fail, the autopilot remains engaged another 2 seconds before disengaging. Additionally, to the red Auto Land Fail annunciators, the amber No Auto Land annunciator is lit as long as the autopilot remains engaged. With Auto Land Fail lit and the autopilot engaged for further maximum 2 seconds, an automatic go-around with the autopilot remaining engaged is initiated by pushing a toga button. The annunciator extinguishes when either the AP disengage button is pressed or when a toga button is pressed. If Cat 3 status is not achieved after the test being initiated at 1,500 feet, the system checks for Cat 2 status. Should Cat 2 status be achieved, the Cat 2 annunciator is lit. Flare mode and all other auto-land modes will not arm, respective engage, the vertical mode remains GS and the lateral mode LOC. The No Auto Land annunciator illuminates when the Cat 3 auto land status has not been achieved on an ILS approach with the AP engaged and the aircraft descends below 900 feet.